In late 1860, the keel of a ship was laid at a shipyard in the rural village of Spencer's Island in Nova Scotia, Canada. By May 18th of the following year, she would be launched as the two-masted brigantine merchant ship Amazon, measuring at 99.3 feet or 30.3 meters in length, 25.5 feet or 7.8 meters broad, with a depth of 11.7 feet or 3.6 meters, and a 198.42 gross tonnage. For her maiden voyage in June 1861, she sailed to Five Islands, Nova Scotia, to take on a cargo of timber bound for London. However, her very first captain, Captain McClellan, suddenly and rapidly fell ill. The Amazon managed to return to Spencer's Island, where McClellan died on June 19th of pneumonia. Her new captain, John Nutting Parker, resumed the voyage to London, only to collide with fishing equipment in the Narrows off Eastport, Maine. After delivering her cargo and leaving London, she then ran into and sank a brig in the English Channel. Parker stayed as her captain for 2 years, during which the ship operated primarily in the West Indies. She traveled to France in November 1861. When she came to the city of Marseille, she was captured in a painting, possibly by a famous maritime artist at the Marseille School, Honoré de Pellegrin. In 1863, Parker was succeeded by William Thompson, who remained in command until 1867, the time in between having been relatively calm for the Amazon. That all changed in October 1867, when she was run aground at Cow Bay, Cape Breton Island, in a storm. This left her so heavily damaged that her owners abandoned her as a shipwreck. Her wreck was bought several times, being purchased on October 15th as a derelict by Alexander McBean, a Nova Scotian, who then sold it to Richard W. Haynes, a New York mariner. Haynes spent a significant amount of time restoring her, and even became her captain for a time, officially changing her name from the Amazon to the Mary Celeste. But that also came to an end in October 1869, when Haynes's creditors seized the vessel before then selling it to a New York consortium, one headed by James H. Winchester, and including a certain sea captain by the name of Benjamin Spooner Briggs. In 1872, the ship underwent a $10,000 refit in New York, which saw her length increase to 103 feet or 31 meters, her breadth to 25.7 feet or 7.8 meters, and her depth to 16.2 feet or 4.9 meters. Among the structural changes, a second deck was added, an extension was made to the poop deck, and the ship's overall tonnage was increased to 282.28 tons. Born in Marion, Massachusetts, USA, on the 24th of April, 1835, Benjamin Spooner Briggs was the second of 5 sons, and the third of 6 children born to a Captain Nathan and his wife, Sophia. They were a seafaring family, with 2 of the 5 sons becoming master mariners at an early age, one of which was Benjamin, and all but one of the sons going to sea. In 1862, Briggs married his cousin, Sarah Elizabeth Cobb, the daughter of a preacher of the Congregational Church in Marion, Massachusetts. Briggs was an experienced seaman, having sailed various vessels such as the brigantine Seafoam, the 3-masted schooner Forest King, and the bark Arthur. He had 2 children with Elizabeth, a son, Arthur, and a daughter, Sophia. Those who knew him described Briggs as having the highest character as a Christian and as an intelligent and active shipmaster. Though he eventually became tired of sailing, in 1872, he invested his savings in a share of the brig Mary Celeste. He even had the cabin remodeled so as to better accommodate his family, ready to take her on her first voyage following her refit. Briggs chose his crew well. His first mate was 28-year-old Albert G. Richardson, a veteran of the American Civil War who was considered to be trustworthy, competent, and had worked together previously with Briggs. Andrew Gilling, a New Yorker of Danish descent who was seen as honest and respectable, served as second mate. The cook and steward for the vessel was 23-year-old Edward William Head, another New Yorker from Brooklyn who was respected by those who knew him. The 4 other sailors were all of German descent and hailed from the Frisian Islands, including brothers Volkert and Boz Lorenzen, the oldest member of the crew, 35-year-old Arian Martins, and finally, 23-year-old Gottlieb Gottschall. In October 1872, the crew prepared for an upcoming transatlantic voyage that would see them transport approximately 1,701 barrels of raw or denatured American alcohol. This alcohol was ethanol that had additives in the mix to make it poisonous, bad tasting, foul smelling, or nauseating. This was meant to discourage its consumption by the crew. It was ultimately to be used in the production of wine. The cargo was valued somewhere between $35,000 and $37,000, or just under $1 million in today's currency, and was bound for Genoa, Italy. On October 20th, Briggs arrived at Pier 50 on the East River in New York City to supervise the loading of the ship's cargo. Briggs explained to his mother in a letter dated November 3rd that the preparations for the voyage were tedious, perplexing, and very tiresome. Quote, "We finished loading last night and shall leave on Tuesday morning if we don't get off tomorrow night, the Lord willing. Our vessel is in beautiful trim, and I hope we shall have a fine passage, but I have never been in her before and can't say how she'll sail." The actual loading of the cargo was completed before dark on Sunday, November 2nd, the same day that his wife, Elizabeth, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, came aboard for the journey. His 7-year-old son, Arthur, remained with his grandmother as he had just started school, a minor detail that, in hindsight, would spare him from what was about to happen. Briggs planned to sail on the upcoming Tuesday. He visited the New York office of the United States Shipping Commissioner on Monday to sign the Articles of Agreement with the Atlantic Mutual Insurance Company, accepting liability for $3,400 on the vessel's freight, while the vessel itself was valued at $14,000. Some accounts of the tale claim that Briggs and his wife met with Captain David Reed Morehouse of the Canadian brigantine De Gratia for dinner the evening before the voyage began at Astor House, which for many years was considered the finest hotel in the United States. There is, however, no solid evidence that the two men ever knew each other. Early on November 5, 1872, the Mary Celeste was towed from Pier 44 to a bay of Staten Island, New York, by the Sandy Hook pilot ship. The Mary Celeste, however, didn't begin her voyage right away. The presence of storms forced Briggs to drop anchor for an extra 2 days, before he was willing to risk venturing out into open sea. In that time, his wife wrote to her mother-in-law, telling her, quote, "It was strong headwind, and it looked so thick and nasty ahead we shouldn't gain much if we were beating and banging about." They sought shelter, waiting for the weather to calm, before finally setting sail from New York Harbor on November 7th. While the Mary Celeste was preparing to sail, the De Gratia lay nearby in Hoboken, New Jersey, awaiting a cargo of 1,735 barrels of petroleum, also headed to Genoa. The De Gratia herself set sail on November 15th, 8 days after Mary Celeste, following along the same general route. 20 days later, on December 4th, shortly after 1 p.m., the De Gratia was about 400 miles east of the Azores, in the waters between the islands and Portugal, when her helmsman, John Johnson, sighted a vessel around 6 miles off the port bow. The mysterious ship was discovered drifting at 38 degrees 20 north, 17 degrees 15 west, 599 miles west of Gibraltar, and 400 nautical miles or 740 kilometers east of the Azores. Something seemed off from the very beginning. She was adrift in choppy seas with 3 of her sails up, but they appeared to be lopsided and torn. Furthermore, while it appeared to be heading for the Strait of Gibraltar, the ship itself wasn't maintaining a straight course. The helmsman quickly noticed something else. The deck was quiet. There was no sign of the crew. Johnson called the second mate, John Wright. Together, they spoke with Captain Morehouse, who then studied the ship through his telescope. He was taken aback when he realized that the unguided vessel was the Mary Celeste, which had left New York City 8 days before him and should have already arrived in Genoa, Italy. He gave the order to offer assistance. The De Gratia changed course to intercept the apparently troubled ship. At around 3 p.m., after 2 hours of observation, they finally closed the distance to about 400 yards of the ship. Morehouse hailed her several times. No reply was received. There were no signals of distress either, leading to his decision to send a boarding party to investigate. Oliver DeVoe, De Gratia's first mate, Wright, and Johnson rowed over to the ship. Johnson stayed in the boat while DeVoe and Wright climbed aboard, DeVoe himself being the first sailor to step onto the eerily quiet vessel. Other than some wear and tear, she was mostly intact, despite the North Atlantic's bad weather at that time of year. However, the poor condition of her sails was noticeable, along with the vessel's slight yawing, the way in which it moved slightly to the side of any specific direction. The most intriguing and most disturbing find, however, was what they didn't find. There was still no sign of the crew or the captain. They spent the next hours searching the Mary Celeste. There was evidence that she had recently been through a storm. The general impression from what they saw suggested that the crew had suddenly abandoned her, and with great haste. The main staysail was discovered on the forward house. Both the foresail and upper foresail had been lost. The fore topmost staysail, the jib, and the fore lower topsail were set, with the remaining sails furled up. Some of the rigging was in poor condition, some parts having blown away, and other parts hanging over the side of the ship. The main peak halyard, a stiff 90-meter-long rope used to hoist the outer end of the gaff sail, was broken and mostly missing. A frayed line was also found mysteriously trailing in the water behind the ship. The only lifeboat was missing, which appeared to have been tied to the ship by that very same rope, and then cut free. A part of the railing had also been removed, likely to make way for the boat. The binnacle housing the ship's compass was knocked over, and the glass cover was broken, with the compass itself being destroyed. One of the vessel's 2 pumps was found disassembled. The ship's wheel was spinning by itself, having no helmsman to control it. Some of the hatch covers were well secured, but the fore and lazarette hatches, a lazarette being a storage locker used for gear or equipment, were removed and found discarded near the hatchways. Moving down below decks, they found about 1.1 meters or 3.5 feet of water sloshing about in the ship's cargo hold as well as in the bilge, an amount that would not have caused panic for an experienced captain and crew like that of the Mary Celeste. Even so, the ship was thoroughly wet, both inside and out, and the sounding rod, a device meant to measure the depth of the water, was found abandoned on deck. Save for 9 barrels made of red oak that were mysteriously found empty, her cargo of 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol was largely intact. The galley equipment was neatly stowed away. Though there was no food prepared or under preparation, there were sufficient provisions, including enough food and water, to last for 6 more months of continuous sailing. The cabins were also discovered to be wet. Personal papers from Briggs were scattered in his cabin. His navigational instruments, including a sextant, chronometer, and navigation book, were all missing, as well as the ship's register and bill of landing. This suggested an orderly abandonment. Briggs had at least enough time to get below deck to collect his navigational equipment before the unexpected departure. The charts had been tossed about, and most of the crewmen's belongings were still in their quarters. Though it was thoroughly wet, on the captain's bed were Sophia's toys, as well as an imprint left by the child herself, as if she had been playing there, all without any sign of distress. Though there are few if any solid indications of violence, according to different accounts, the captain's sword was found sheathed beneath his bed. Something that looked like blood was discovered on the blade. Some accounts state that more blood was seen on the woodwork of the deck and on the sails, and that there were even cuts on the railing indicative of a sword. Amongst other things in Briggs's cabin, DeVoe also found a chart showing the Mary Celeste's progress up to November 24th. He then found something even more consequential lying on the captain's table: the daily logbook. Upon looking through it, he learned that the ship traveled through heavy storms for 2 weeks. But there was one last unusual detail. The final entry was dated Monday, November 25th, 8 a.m., 9 days earlier. It reads as follows: At 5 o'clock, made island of St. Mary's bearing east-southeast. At 8 o'clock, eastern point bore south-southwest 6 miles distant. The notation made that morning was that the Mary Celeste was 6 miles northeast of the Azores' easternmost island of Santa Maria, close enough to have seen land. This last confirmed position was some 500 miles from where the de Grazia would find her over a week later. Given what was supposed, it is believed that after this point, for whatever reason, the Mary Celeste was abandoned. She then proceeded to spend the next 9 days sailing herself across the Atlantic without a single soul on board. The entire crew, Captain Benjamin Briggs, along with his wife and 2-year-old daughter, were nowhere to be found.